All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. U.S. troops have installed a new provincial governor in the town of Marjah nearly 2 weeks since launching the largest assault of the 8-year Afghan war. Over 11,000 U.S. and Afghan troops have battled a few hundred Taliban fighters. The Washington Post reported this week Marjah was attacked not for its military significance, but to, quote, convince Americans that a new era has arrived in the 8-year-long war and to show Afghans that U.S. and Afghan forces can protect them from the Taliban, unquote. The House has voted to repeal the health insurance industry's exemption from antitrust laws by a vote of 406 to 19. The measure would undo a 1945 law critics say has helped grant the insurance industry a captive market with no curbs on price fixing and other anti-competitive practices. During debate on the House floor, Congressmember Anthony Weiner criticized Republican opponents of the bill, calling them, quote, a wholly owned subsidiary of the insurance industry.
They say that, well, we want to strengthen state insurance commissioners and they'll do the job. But when we did that in our national health care bill, they said we're against it. They said they want to have competition, and when we proposed requiring competition, the Republicans are against it.
The House vote comes
They're a wholly owned subsidiary of the insurance industry. That's the fact.
The House vote comes ahead of today's bipartisan health care summit at the White House. On the eve of the summit, new figures were released underscoring the enormity of health care lobbying on Capitol Hill. The Center for Public Integrity says companies and organizations seeking to influence health care reform legislation hired over 4,500 lobbyists, 8 for every member of Congress. Health care lobbyists doubled throughout 2009, reaching nearly 3,700 in the fourth quarter. The group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, known as CREW, meanwhile, released figures showing health care special interests have invested over $28 million on influential members of Congress since 2005. The Washington Post is reporting the Obama administration will no longer insist on establishing an independent consumer protection agency as part of an overhaul of financial regulation. White House officials are said to be considering proposals to place the agency inside a different government department like the Treasury. Top Democrats are also reportedly preparing to drop the administration's call for limits on the practice known as proprietary trading, in which commercial banks trade financial securities from their own commercial accounts. Former Federal Reserve Chair Paul Volcker had proposed the curbs to help undo some of the damage of the 1999 repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, which had ensured the separation of commercial and investment banks. On Wednesday, President Obama defended his economic policies in a speech before the Business Roundtable, a group of top corporate executives. Obama said his agenda has been unfairly described as socialism.
Contrary to the claims of some of my critics and some of the editorial pages, I am an ardent believer in the free market. I believe businesses like yours are the engines of economic growth in this country. You create jobs, you develop new products and cutting-edge technologies, and you create the supply chains that make it possible for small businesses to open their doors. So I want everyone in this room to succeed.
The Senate has passed a $15 billion job creation package by a vote of 70 to 28. The bill focuses mostly on tax breaks for companies to encourage hiring. The Congressional Black Caucus had criticized the bill for not directing any money to poor communities. Democrats say they plan to unveil a new job package of jobless benefits, state aid, and more tax breaks next week. In another vote, the Senate backed a one-year extension to 3 key provisions of the USA PATRIOT Act due to expire this month. The provisions authorize roving wiretaps, allowing surveillance on multiple phones, seizure of records and property in terrorism raids, and the monitoring of non-U.S. citizens with no proven ties to designated terrorist groups. Democrats had initially proposed adding new privacy protections, but relented following Republican objection. The measure now goes to the House. The private military firm Blackwater came under scrutiny Wednesday at a congressional hearing on its operations in Afghanistan. The Senate Armed Services Committee heard testimony the military giant Raytheon asked Blackwater to come up with a different name so it could be awarded a subcontract without stirring controversy. Blackwater created the subsidiary Paravant as a result. During the hearing, an activist with the peace group Code Pink accused Blackwater employee of threatening his life. The activist, Ty Barry, stood before Blackwater officials as they exited the room during a recess. Barry held up a sign and called for an end to the use of private contractors like Blackwater. Video footage of the incident shows a Blackwater employee, identified as Johnny Walker, saying something to Barry as he passes by.
We do not need to hire these murderers. Yeah, see, there you get a threat from this guy. He says he's going to kill me. This is how they react. This is how they run their business. They are trained murderers. They're killers.
Barry says he's filed a complaint against Walker with the Capitol Police. In another closely watched hearing, the head of the auto giant Toyota, Akio Toyoda, appeared before a House Oversight Committee panel and apologized for the safety fiasco that's led to the recall of millions of vehicles.
We pursued growth over the speed at which we are able to develop our people and our organization, and we should sincerely be mindful of that. I regret that this has resulted in the safety issue described in the recalls we face today, and I am deeply sorry for any accident that Toyota drivers have experienced.
In other news from Washington, Democratic Senators Tom Udall of New Mexico and Chris Dodd of Connecticut have introduced a constitutional amendment to reverse the Supreme Court ruling allowing corporations to spend unlimited amounts of money to elect and defeat candidates. In a 5-4 decision last month, the court overturned century-old restrictions on corporations, unions, and other interest groups from using their vast treasuries to advocate for a specific candidate. The Udall-Dodd measure would allow for government regulation of campaign fundraising and spending at the federal and state level. In New Orleans, a retired police lieutenant has pleaded guilty to directing a cover-up of the police killing of 2 African-American men in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. The victims, 42-year-old Ronald Madison and 19-year-old James Brissett, were crossing the Danziger Bridge in search of food. Madison, who was mentally handicapped, was shot 7 times, 5 in his back. On Wednesday, former New Orleans Police Department Lieutenant Michael Lohman pleaded guilty to a charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice. Prosecutors say Lohman conspired with other unidentified officers in fabricating witness statements, falsifying incident reports, and planting a gun. After the plea, Ronald Madison's brother, Romel Madison, spoke outside the courtroom.
Tremendous relief for us to see that we have some sort of closure that we're working on. We're very happy to see that the rest of the population, our family, other victims, and the citizens of New Orleans should be relieved that there is still justice for everybody here.
Lohman's conviction is the first in the Danziger case. Charges were dismissed against 7 police officers in 2008. Prosecutors say their investigation is continuing. Federal investigators are also probing